Everywhere. A lot of love for Tom here, but there's a lot of love for Tom everywhere, right now, and everywhere at once, and it's pretty beautiful given what we've gone through losing him, the feeling of love, and being here in his hometown, my first time ever, after knowing so much about it. Thank you, my friend. And hearing the myths and the reality of this place, getting to meet his friends that were part of this story that I never met, it's just been great, and kind of an author's dream to have a beautiful thing like this set up around the subject of my book. I really love that. Because there's few things I love talking about more than Tom. Tom was a hopeful guy. He was in the music industry. And often I think of that line in The Godfather 2, when they go, "This is the business we've chosen." It applies to the music business too. That you know what you're getting into when you get into it. And Tom knew. It's not an easy business to be in, but it was the only place for Tom Petty to be. And he made it work, but he remained hopeful, even during tough times. And there's many examples of this. When he first came to Los Angeles, he stayed, first they stayed at what he called a hooker's motel, the Hollywood Premier on Sunset Boulevard, but not on the good part of Sunset Boulevard, far east of there. And but then, pretty quickly on after they got the deal, he stayed in an apartment they gave him in Encino. But later he lived up in the hills in Encino, where it's nicer, but he stayed right on the freeway. So loud that this place, backed up to the freeway, so it was just a huge roar, which drove most people just crazy. But being Tom Petty, he loved the symbolic feeling of it. Here he was in California, and he said it reminded him of the ocean. Here, this highway in the distance, very close actually, and it reminded him of waves crashing. And as you guys probably know, that came into a song of his, but he switched it to the 441. Isn't that very near here, the 441? Yeah, it's like just over there, right? It was kind of cold that night. She stood alone on her balcony. She could hear the cars roll by out on 441, like waves crashing on the beach. She was an American girl raised on promises. And she couldn't help but thinking there was a little more to life somewhere else. That's Tom. He's right on the freeway. Most people would be going nutty, and he'd hear the ocean and turn it into a song. No matter if he was happy, like he was a lot of the time, especially towards the last years of his life, or if he was going through tough times, which happened a lot of for different reasons and many different times. He wrote great songs, and his saddest times, he wrote songs like Echo. He wrote beautiful songs of love called Angel Dream. When he first met Dana, he dreamt of her that night. I dreamed your face, and that was perfectly true. When he wrote a love song, it was real. As you guys know, he felt it from his heart. And that's what touches us always in his songs, and will forever. Those are timeless songs. And that's the ultimate achievement of the songwriter, to write something that lasts. If you write one song that the whole world knows, that's huge. You wrote that? Some people that no one knows their name, but they know that song. Many examples. Tom, as you might know, has done that many, many, many times. He has so many songs that the whole world knows, in all ages, all kinds of people. We did our book in 2005, and since then, it got reviews, and now there's a thing called Goodreads, where readers can review books. And so, of course, being a self-obsessed author, I have to go check those out. Who wouldn't, I must say that people loved it, generally. They loved this chance to be with Tom, because it's Tom in his own words. And that's what he was about. It's honest. I wasn't going to rewrite him or try to put in my own words his story. It was Tom in his own words, mostly talking about songs and music. That was the initial idea. But there was one criticism I found kind of funny that came up once in a while, in several. They said, if Zollo's guilty of anything in this book, it's too much gushing. He seemed to be too hyperbolic in his praise of Tom. As if I might have been doing it for the typical reason, just to butter someone up so you get good stuff. But in truth, I'm a songwriter, and I have great reverence, for amazing songwriters. And I'm a fan. And these songs are, to me, miracle songs. So many of these songs, like I know for all of you, they mean so much to me. We live in these songs. We make sense out of our life with these songs. We think of those lines. So many of them. I think of every day. Most things I worry about never happen anyway. Can there be more truer lines for living in modern times than that? Sometimes they do happen, those things. But the truth is, that wasn't fake gushing. That was real, because I'm in awe. And And he knew that, and that's what was our initial bond. When I first interviewed him in 1994, Wildflowers was about to come out. And so I got the advance, Mary Clouser sent it, without knowing anything. I didn't know there'd be such a bounty of songs. I was already just so amazed by the Full Moon Fever and what came out there, and that change in sound, and just the sense of joy that he seemed to be reaching, and a sense of beautiful simplicity, where he's able just to get to the essence and the core of a song, but always so melodic and so heartfelt. I thought after that, it couldn't be much better than that. Usually people do something that great and they go downhill. But then we get Wildflowers, and so many songs, and every kind of song, from the most tender, Wildflowers, the perfect name for that album, Wildflowers that grow on their own, but it's beautiful, with just a little gentle guidance from the creator. Some of the songs, like Wildflowers, Tom said he didn't have to work on very much. They came out. And others he did work on. A song which you wouldn't think maybe he worked on so long, You Wreck Me. That was written to Mike Campbell's track. Mike would give Tom many tracks, 20, 30, Tom would find one, and then he'd work on it for a long time and get it right. And You Wreck Me, he said he had it, but he had You Rock Me for almost a year. And he just knew that's close, but it's not right. And he had that sense that is close, but he didn't settle. Tom never settled. He's like, that could be better, even if it takes a year. And then he got You Wreck Me, and one word like that changed the whole song. The song is such a small form that any tiny change like that is momentous. But it took him a year. And also when you think about that song, Mike gave him those chords. And Tom doesn't sing right on the chord change, just like he would normally do. He sings between those chord changes. He inserts the melody in a place that it works perfectly, but it's not normal and it's not expected, and yet it's just great. And that was the essence of who he was. He always made things a little different, so they always were appealing, but always so melodically and harmonically beautiful to hear. So that gushing was real. So the first time I interviewed him on Wildflowers, like I do, so I've been interviewing the great songwriters of our time for years. I did a book called Songwriters on Songwriting with a lot of the interviews, and I had Paul Simon and Bob Dylan, and Tom Petty's in that book as well. And my son said, you should mention that book, Dad. They like Tom Petty, let them know. That's called Songwriters on Songwriting. And I did the sequel. And it's great for me to talk to songwriters because you want to find out how do great songwriters write their songs. How did Tom Petty, he looks like a regular human, how did he write all those? And still, I just keep doing it. How did he sustain it? After he did it for 40 years. You think of the Beatles, what they did, it was 10 years. He did it 4 times more than that, and he sustained the passion and the love. And he would be the first person to say he did it because he loved it. There's nothing he loved more except his children and Dana, certainly, his wife. There was love, that kind of love, but there was nothing else in life that he had more passion for than songs and music and making records. And I think we all know that. He loved writing songs, especially when he got something good. If it took him a lot of time, he would take a lot of time. He had this method he told me about where every component of the song has to be equally good. You can't have a great chorus and a weak verse, or a great verse, great chorus, and weak bridge. That bridge is that short section the Beatles would call the middle 8 that you only hear once. Each section has to be perfect, or they're not going to get on the album. He had his A songs and what he considered his B songs, those ones that were close, but not close enough, not for Tom. As I said, he didn't settle. He didn't take anything lightly. He seemed like a really easygoing guy, too, but he wasn't. He told me that his daughter, I think it was Kim, told him that she thought it was so funny. Dad, everybody thinks you're like this mellow, easygoing guy, and you are so not that guy. But, in person, he was such a likable and personable guy and down to earth that it was easy to think he was that way, but he worried a lot. Those songs about worry, they were about him. And he talked about that often. He said that was one thing, getting to be friends with people like George Harrison and Bob Dylan. If you've heard of them, also excellent songwriters. People quite famous. And he saw Dylan, he wasn't comfortable with people that treated him like a prophet or a god. He was a guy. And Tom realized that right away, that these people are human. And just because you're a rock star or you're famous the whole world over, you still have to go through all the human things. And he realized with Dylan right away, as long as he was real with Dylan, Dylan really appreciated that. And it was the same with Tom, you know. Tom was a real guy, and he was nice to people. And if you were lucky enough to meet him, you would know that already. And as I've said, it's so true if you haven't met him, but you know his songs, and you live inside them, and they've inspired you, you do know Tom, because that's really him. Where some people, you hear their songs, and that they're distant from that person. They're contriving the song or putting on a pose. Tom didn't do that. Even if he'd be writing in character, which he often did. He said Rebels was written in character. It was written about that person in the South. It wasn't necessarily meant to be him. But anything a songwriter writes about, it's about them, those choices, those characters he writes about. Even the song he told me, You Don't Know How It Feels, which he wrote at the time of Wildflowers. Rick Rubin, his producer, said, you know, that's not a good song, Tom. It shouldn't even be on the album. As you know, it became a big hit. And Tom had great, you know, understanding and confidence in the songs, as he should. He's Tom Petty, and he had a genius and a knack and great talent for it, and great diligence in making his songs great. But he also listened to other people. Someone asked yesterday, was he collaborative with his band, or did he just dictate to them? He was so collaborative. He was always open to what anyone else would bring. Of course, he worked with great artists, great musicians. His band, some of the greatest musicians ever in rock and roll, one of the great rock and roll bands of all time, and his producers. You know, he worked with producers, generally, after the beginning, that he really respected. Jimmy Iovine, you know, made some great albums with him, but he was always complaining that Jimmy was more of an executive than a producer, and was always on the phone. So Tom famously, several times, would take his scissors and cut the phone. It's good you guys understand there were chords on it. And my understanding, he cut it several times. I think Jimmy that probably had an impact. I would think that he was getting on the phone. Then he took over the entire music industry. But after that, people like Jeff Lynne, he said Jeff Lynne was one of the greatest musicians and greatest producers of his time. It's not my mom calling, is it? And Rick Rubin, too. And it was Rick Rubin who really helped him with recording, because prior to working with Rick Rubin, they did this kind of recording. You might also know about this, it's called analog, where they recorded to magnetic tape. And so if you wanted just to cut stuff around, you couldn't do it digitally. You had to cut tape and, you know, mix, and, you know, ultimately it got more automated and more controllable. But back then, it was tough. If you didn't get the take, you didn't get the take. And Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers was always about real band playing in real time. Kind of like the Rolling Stones. They didn't go in and record every part separately and mix them all together. And it was about real musicians playing in real time. So that means if you make real mistakes, you have to really do it over again, too. Sometimes he just wasn't getting what he wanted, and Tom was getting very upset. And what happened often is he'd make a lot of great demos at home. You're home and you're working on the song, you're feeling great, and you make a home demo. And he has a great spirit, and then you try to duplicate that in the recording studio. That could be really hard. People call it demo-itis. And that really frustrated him. And Rick Rubin explained, you know, after a certain while, when digital came in, you can take those home demos, that guitar track, we could use that, you know. You don't have to start over. That was such a liberation at Tom. So as time went on, he became easier with the process. But he always worked really hard. And he said, I thought this was very touching, he said in our book, it always feels good to finish an album because I've done it long enough to know these things are going to be around a lot longer than me. It's something that wasn't there and now it is. I love that about art. You just created something and now it's here and it could be here longer than you. I think he understood that. And I know it's been really tough for all of us and really hard to accept that he's not around. So I always pictured I'd do another edition of the book and we'd add some chapters together. Because I had this happy hope of going back to Malibu and hanging with him, because that was just about the most fun I've ever had. It doesn't get much better than just hanging with Tom and talking about his music all the time. It was such a joy. I never considered we'll do another version and Tom wouldn't be here for it. So that's been tough. What's really made up for it is getting to meet so many people that love him so much. And the love for Tom is authentic as his music, I found. And you guys are just as real and loving as he is. And as you know well, more than just about any rock star, he really cared about you guys. He cared about his fans. even if they just want to raise his LP price $1. My fans they might not want to pay another $1, even for Tom Petty album. I got a feeling everyone would have, you know. They wouldn't have blamed Tom either, but he took it on himself. He would just think those record companies, poor Tom has to deal with this. No, he's like, they're going to blame me, so he fought that. And he said when he fought that, he stood up against a giant record company.
Bravo.
And he wrote, I won't back down. And he didn't back down, you know, when he believed in something, but he also assumed that his peers, some of them would join him, and nobody joined him. They were like, I don't know if anyone told Tom, you don't do this, you know, you don't pull you down, you know. But not Tom, he cared about the fans first, and that was so unusual. When he felt radio and the whole music business shifting, where radio used to play songs because they were great, and they became hits because people loved them so much they bought them. When it started shifting, where suddenly the music business was doing the marketing first and then coming up with the product, Tom knew that was no good. And when he saw radio changing, where the DJs no longer could make choices of rock and roll, he knew that's not going to lead to good stuff. And so he wrote The Last DJ, which was an indictment of radio and the business itself, which again is not something you do, to bite the hand that's been feeding you for decades. But Tom recognized too, that hand wouldn't have much to feed anyone with, if not for great songwriters. And he recognized that. And Tom, like me, being songwriters, I think all songwriters have great reverence for the art of songwriting and the craft, and people who do it great. And once there's someone that's done it once, but the whole world knows it, like Ruth Ann Friedman, my friend, wrote the song Windy by the Association. It's mostly a folkie, but her friend Van Dyke Parks got the song to the Association, became a hit. Most people know that song, at least people my age. And then, you know, it's a great song too. But one song, and that impacted the world. Tom's done that so much, and so there's just true reverence for him. Reverence is the perfect word because it's a mixture of respect, but awe too. I respect the craftsman, but there's just awe at the genius of the guy. He was really a genius, and he had mastery of the song for him. And that's what it comes down to. If you don't have a good song, you don't have a lot to work with, and he knew that. And when he got signed to a record deal, he knew, that means I'm going to have to write 10 good songs a year, not just any good songs. Tom Petty and the Heartbreaker songs, that good. They didn't want to let you guys down again. And he said, you know, I could be like Stanley. I could go out every night and be a rock star and have fun and go to premieres, but I have to stay home and write the songs. And so he'd kind of complain about it, but at the same time, he loved it because he got much more satisfaction out of that. I think all songwriters realize after a while you can have romances. They don't often last. But if you write a song about that romance, or of course the great Broken Hearted song, you keep the song. The romance is long gone, but you get the song. And Tom did that many times. And when he was broken-hearted, when he was hopeful, he wrote great songs about all aspects because they were human and they were real. But he really understood songs, and he had basic, fundamental understanding of songs and the importance of simplicity and what makes a song great. A lot of things that would almost seem obvious to songwriters, and yet songwriters often miss them. And it's one reason that Tom's songs resonate with us. They did when we first heard them, and they continue to for decades. Because a song, especially now in modern times, it's an ancient thing. For someone to be working on something so ancient, it's like someone who spends all their time, taking care of thatching roofs or cobbling shoes. A lot of people don't put time into that anymore, and it's an ancient craft. And songs use ancient craft, things like rhyme and melody that even most poetry doesn't use rhyme anymore, but songs do. And Tom was a great rhymer. But the thing about songs is if you make your rhyme too obvious, it seems contrived. It seems like hack songwriting. So you have to use these things like rhymes that are contrivances in a way, but in a way that they don't seem contrived. You have to intentionally and consciously tap into that unconscious part, where words are poetic, yet conversational, and then he's using symbols, symbology, and metaphors, and song structure, and add to that music, melody. And we don't think about melody very much, but in truth, there are people that are studying, neuroscientists studying musicians' minds, trying to find out how the mind works of a musician, and they have really no clue about melody. Where does that come from? We know more about getting to Mars and back at this moment than we know about melody. Or as you guys know, they call them earworms, when you just wake up in the morning or any part of the day and you have a song in your head. But it's not necessarily the most recent song you heard. It's a song that's got in there for some reason, but who makes that choice and how does that happen? They don't really know. And I think in a lot of ways that's what's beautiful about songwriting, that you're dealing with a mystery. Leonard Cohen said to me, he said, if I knew where the great songs came from, I'd go there more often. And then he said, being a songwriter is like being married to a mystery. It's like being a Catholic nun in many ways. I thought it was quite religious at first, but I know what he means. Right? Every day you're going to, you're devoted to this mystery that you can't even see or touch or completely understand, but your whole life is about that. And songwriters, I think, rejoice in that. And I talked to Tom, because he was a great melodist. So good you might not even think about it, but I mean, just free falling, an obvious example, that jump up to the up to the octave on the chorus, which was Jeff Lynne's idea. He said, why don't you jump up the octave? It's all great contribution. Because suddenly it's like somewhere over the rainbow. That kind of leap is emotional, and that's old-fashioned songwriting. But Tom understood that, that melodies can reach your heart, but you don't want to do it in a way that once again seems too contrived. But you match it with Tom Petty words like free falling, and it's just perfect. But he had just great mastery of all those parts of the song form. And also how he put together chords. And that's what it comes down to, especially if you're a guitar-based songwriter, which he mostly was. He wrote some great songs, like Southern Accents on piano and others. Room at the Top on piano. How you put together chords that's where the melody is rooted. That's what the melody comes out of. And for you guys that know, has been playing the songs, I know a lot of us have, which is fun and a joy and a great education for any songwriter. His use of chords is ingenious because he's playing rock and roll mostly, and there's only so many chords that you're gonna use in rock and roll. But every now and then he'll use just one or two in a place you wouldn't consider it. Like, whoa! And it's just genius. And in a song, it's easy to go away from the normal thing, but it's getting back seamlessly that really takes genius. And he would do that so many times. Sometimes it would just come naturally to him. He said with Southern Accents, which he wrote at 4 a.m. at home on the piano, he started flowing and he was just so moved. He knew what he was doing. And then when it came time to get to that bridge, the bridge starts this beautiful sequence about a dream of his mother kneeling down by his bed and praying. Pretty touching image. It always reminds me of Let It Be, when he's talking about Mother Mary. And such a beautiful and holy kind of feeling in that song. And Tom said that bridge, the music came to him immediately. He said, the first times I went to those chords, those were the chords. That doesn't usually happen, especially the bridge, because it's the one place in the song you can go someplace different and never repeats, and then you can come back. So it's kind of a chance to get away a little bit, but to come back. And often that takes a lot of work to get a bridge that can do that, and yet just works so beautifully. And he did it the first time. And so sometimes like that, things would just come through him, but other times he worked really hard to get the chords exactly what he wanted. And he paid a lot of attention to that. And I talked to him a lot of times about that. You take sometimes just 3 chords, but you turn them inside out. Instead of the 1-4-5, as we know, it's 5-1-4 often, which is just a little change, but you feel it differently and it propels things. And he does that thing often, which is meaningless if you're not a musician. You just know it feels good. But to us nerds, we pay attention to this stuff. And so let's go wonderful. So when I would interview Tom and other great songwriters who I just had awe for, and I grew up learning to write songs by learning their songs, Paul Simon and Bob Dylan, I would learn the songs. And these guys, they're geniuses in writing lyrics and all that, but it's in the music. And fundamentally, it's in what Simon called the crucial balance of words and music. If you got a great lyric, the best ever, you could have any one of Tom's lyrics, but without a melody that propels it, is visceral and is rock and roll, and it's coming, from his soulful center, it wouldn't be anything. And vice versa. It's the way the two go together. He knew that. And so he's very conscious of that. And he was conscious of all the songwriter tricks, like a way to get people's attention, like Barry Manilow would often do these, what I would consider very small C key changes, where somebody's doing the chorus and boom, it just jumps up and does another chorus. And it's like, wow, that was dramatic, it almost knocked you over. But Tom, he knew about that stuff. If he ever did anything like that, it would be subtle. He's not gonna get carried away that way. But he was aware of all that stuff. And so he told me he paid a lot of attention to Buddy Holly. He says, Buddy Holly wrote almost every song in A major, and he'd use mainly 3 chords, but he'd use them in such ingenious ways. He put them every this way and that way, and Tom learned that, and Tom did the same thing, and so many people have learned so much from learning Tom's songs. And so I did that, and every time I learned one, it was just thrilling. Like Insider, for example. Like, how is he making that? I said, oh. And as he said many times, it's not easy. It might sound easy. I know it's only 3 minutes long or something, but to make something that perfect, that works forever in 3 minutes, that's a huge achievement. Because a song is a very limited form. And to create something in such a narrow space that is boundless, that doesn't have any limits, that's really an amazing achievement. Krishnamurti, the philosopher, said, limitations create potential. And songwriters see that. Instead of thinking, well, we only have a tiny bit of space here, what are we going to do? They embrace that, and Tom embraced that. And it was always fascinating to see how his chords went together and how he did that. And often, the chords, you might just see them online, it's very simple, but they were always playing interesting voicing. Sometimes when he and Mike would play on a chord, and Ben Mont, a genius of music, they were throwing in some voicings and some, adult chords more than you would know often. So they're never as easy as you think, but always put together with such genius and inventiveness and love of the process. So I learned his songs, and that really appealed to me when I went in the first time I was talking about Wildflowers. I love to bring up the old songs, and some songwriters don't want to talk about old stuff. It's like talking about my new album. Tom loved it, because I brought him 2 Gunslingers, which was always one of my favorites. A secret here, you guys know. There's so many of the songs like that that are just brilliant. If they put that out,